The sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Willow Creek as Pearl Taylor stood on the auction block, her eyes filled with defiance despite the shackles binding her wrists. It was 1876, and the mining town had seen its fair share of depravity, but selling a woman to the highest bidder was a new low even for the Hadley brothers, who now pointed to Pearl like she was nothing more than livestock. $20 for this fine specimen, Earl Hadley shouted, his voice carrying across the crowd of rough-looking miners and travelers. Look at her, gents. Healthy, strong, and mighty pretty too. She'll cook, clean, and warm your bed on those cold mountain nights. Pearl's chin remained high, though her heart hammered against her ribs. 3 days ago, she'd been working at her father's general store when the Hadleys rode in. Now her father was dead, the store ransacked, and she was property to be sold. 25, called a voice from the back. 30, shouted another. Pearl scanned the crowd, looking for a sympathetic face among the sea of leering grins and hungry eyes. That's when she saw him, a tall cowboy leaning against the hitching post, watching the proceedings with a stillness that set him apart from the rowdy crowd. His eyes, blue as summer skies, met hers for a brief moment. $50, bellowed a red-faced miner, who smelled of whiskey even from a distance. Earl Hadley grinned. $50. Do I hear 60? $100, came a calm voice from the back. The crowd parted as the cowboy stepped forward, dust kicking up beneath his worn boots. He moved with a deliberate grace, hand resting casually near his holstered Colt. Well now, Earl said, tugging at his greasy beard. Looks like we got ourselves a serious buyer. Pearl felt a flicker of hope mixed with new fear. One master or another, what difference did it make? The cowboy stopped at the foot of the makeshift platform. $100, he repeated, and I'm only saying it once. Something in his voice made the Hadley brothers exchange nervous glances. This wasn't a man to be trifled with. Sold, Earl declared, reaching for the money. She's yours, stranger. What might your name be? The cowboy counted out the bills methodically. Asher Cole, he said, not looking up from his task. Well, Mr. Cole, pleasure doing business. She's a bit spirited, but nothing a firm hand can't fix. Earl chuckled, nudging his brother. Asher's gaze hardened. The key to her shackles. Earl tossed it over, and Asher climbed the 3 steps to where Pearl stood. She flinched as he reached for her wrists, but his touch was surprisingly gentle as he unlocked the iron cuffs. What happens now? Pearl whispered, her first words since being dragged onto the auction block. Asher turned to the crowd, his voice carrying across the dusty street. This woman isn't property. She's free to go wherever she pleases. A murmur rippled through the onlookers. Earl Hadley stepped forward, face reddening. Now wait just a minute. You paid for her fair and square. I paid to end this spectacle, Asher replied evenly. Not to own another human being. That ain't how it works around here, mister. Earl growled, his hand inching toward his gun. Asher positioned himself between Pearl and the Hadleys. I suggest you take the money and consider yourself fortunate. And if we don't, the younger Hadley challenged. Then I'll stay, Asher said, his voice quiet but firm. I'll stay so she never has to be sold again. To you or anyone else. The threat hung in the air, clear as a church bell on Sunday morning. The Hadleys might have been ruthless, but they weren't fools. Something in Asher's steady gaze told them he wasn't making an idle threat. Fine, Earl spat, pocketing the money. She's your problem now. As the crowd dispersed, Pearl found her voice. Why would you do that? You don't even know me. Asher Cole looked down at her, his expression softening slightly. Because it was the right thing to do, Mississippi. Taylor. Pearl Taylor, she said, rubbing her chafed wrists. And I appreciate what you did, Mr. Cole, but I can't repay you. I never asked for payment. He glanced around the town square. Do you have somewhere to go? Pearl's eyes drifted to the smoldering remains of her father's store at the end of the street. Not anymore. Asher followed her gaze and understood immediately. I'm sorry for your loss, he said simply. Pearl was struck by the genuine empathy in his voice. Most men she'd known hid their feelings behind gruff exteriors, but there was something different about Asher Cole. I have a camp set up outside town, he offered. You're welcome to rest there while you decide what to do next. Pearl hesitated. Going off alone with a stranger wasn't wise, even one who'd just spent $100 to free her. But staying in Willow Creek with the Hadley brothers lurking wasn't an option either. Why should I trust you? She asked directly. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Fair question. I can't give you a reason except my word, which I've never broken. You can take my horse if you prefer a ride to the next town. I'll walk. The offer surprised her. Good horses were worth more than what he'd paid for her freedom. No, she decided. I'll go with you. But just until I figure out my next step. Asher nodded once. Of course. As they walked toward the edge of town, Pearl felt the stares of townspeople who had stood by and done nothing while she was put up for auction. Only this stranger had intervened. She held her head high, refusing to show them how deeply their betrayal cut. Asher's horse, a magnificent chestnut gelding, waited patiently at the hitching post. This is Copper, Asher said, untying the reins. He offered Pearl a hand up, which she accepted after only a moment's hesitation. Once she was settled in the saddle, Asher took the reins and began leading the horse out of town on foot. You don't have to walk, Pearl said. I can ride behind you. It's not far, he replied. They traveled in silence as the town receded behind them. Pearl studied her rescuer's broad shoulders and the way he moved with purpose. Who was this man who would spend such a sum to free a stranger, then offer to walk while she rode? True to his word, Asher's camp wasn't far, a small clearing near a stream, with a lean-to shelter and a neat campfire pit. It was simple but orderly, speaking to a man who valued practicality. It's not much, he said, helping her down from the saddle, but it's safe. It's more than I had an hour ago, Pearl replied, watching as he efficiently unsaddled Copper and set about rebuilding the fire. Mr. Cole, Asher, please. Asher, she amended. I need to know why you really helped me. Men don't just spend $100 without expecting something in return. He paused in his work, considering her question. My father was a slave before the war, he said finally. He told me stories about being on auction blocks like the one they put you on today. No human being should be sold like cattle. Pearl was taken aback. She hadn't expected such a personal reason. Looking closer at Asher, she noticed subtle features that spoke to mixed heritage features she'd overlooked in the chaos of the auction. Your father was a slave? But you pass for white most days, he finished for her. It's opened doors that would have been closed otherwise. My mother was Irish. He shrugged slightly. But that's not important. What matters is that you're free now. Pearl sat on a log by the fire pit, suddenly overwhelmed by the events of the day. My father was all I had in this world, she said quietly. They killed him because he tried to stop them from taking me. Asher paused in his work. I'm sorry, he said again, and the simple sincerity in his voice broke something inside Pearl. Tears she'd been holding back spilled down her cheeks. Without a word, Asher handed her a clean bandana, then busied himself with the fire to give her a moment of privacy. Thank you, she managed after composing herself. Not just for this, but for standing up when no one else would. He nodded once in acknowledgement. Are you hungry? Pearl realized she hadn't eaten since the previous day. Starving, actually. I've got beans and bacon. Not fancy, but it'll fill your stomach. Sounds perfect, she said with genuine gratitude. As Asher prepared the simple meal, Pearl watched him work. His movements were efficient, his presence reassuring rather than threatening. For the first time since her father's murder, she felt the vice grip of terror loosening around her heart. They ate in companionable silence as twilight settled over the landscape. The simple food tasted better than any meal Pearl could remember. What will you do now? Asher asked eventually. Pearl stared into the flames. I don't know. Everything I owned was in that store. She looked up at him. What about you? Were you just passing through Willow Creek? Heading to California, he replied. I've been drifting since the war ended, taking work where I can find it. Heard there's good land out west for those willing to work it. California, Pearl repeated, a wistful note in her voice. My father talked about going there someday. Said it was a place where a person could start fresh. It still could be, Asher suggested. For you, I mean. Pearl considered this. Maybe, but I'd need money, supplies. We'll figure something out, Asher said, then added quickly. If you want my help, that is. Pearl studied him across the firelight. Why would you help me further? You've already done more than anyone could expect. Asher poked at the fire with a stick. Because I know what it's like to lose everything. And because. He hesitated. Because I said I'd stay so you wouldn't have to be sold. I meant it. Pearl felt something warm unfurl in her chest at his words. You're a rare kind of man, Asher Cole. The hint of a smile touched his lips. Just doing what's right, Miss Taylor. Pearl, she corrected him. If I'm calling you Asher, you should call me Pearl. He nodded, and they fell into silence again, but it was a comfortable one. As the stars appeared overhead, Pearl realized she trusted this stranger more than she trusted anyone besides her father. It wasn't just that he'd saved her, it was the quiet dignity with which he carried himself. You should get some rest, Asher said eventually. Take the lean-to. I'll sleep by the fire. Pearl wanted to protest, but exhaustion was quickly overtaking her. Thank you, she said simply, rising from her seat. For everything. Asher just nodded, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. As Pearl settled into the simple bedroll beneath the lean-to, she listened to the night sounds of the wilderness and the occasional movement of Asher tending the fire. Despite everything, despite the horror of the past few days, she felt safe. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, she would rest under the protection of a man who'd given her back her freedom. The morning dawned clear and bright, sunlight filtering through the trees surrounding Asher's camp. Pearl awoke disoriented, the events of the previous day rushing back as she took in her surroundings. The smell of coffee drew her from the lean-to. Asher sat by a small morning fire, 2 tin cups beside him. Hope you like your coffee strong, he said by way of greeting. After the last few days, I'd drink mud if it had enough kick to it, Pearl replied, gratefully accepting the offered cup. Asher smiled a real smile this time, transforming his solemn features. It might be close to mud, but it'll wake you up. Pearl sipped the bitter brew, welcoming its warmth. What happens now? She asked, voicing the question that had circled her mind through fitful dreams. That depends on you, Asher said. The nearest proper town is Silverton, about 2 days' ride from here. You could make a fresh start there. With what? Pearl gestured to herself. These clothes and your charity are all I have in the world now. Asher considered this. Your father's store was anything salvageable. Pearl shook her head. The Hadleys were thorough. They took what they wanted and burned the rest. What did your father sell in his store? Everything a mining town needs: tools, dry goods, ammunition, some clothing. A lump formed in her throat. He built it from nothing after my mother died. 10 years of work, gone in a single night. Asher's expression darkened. The law in these parts is bought and paid for by whoever has the most gold dust. Pearl finished bitterly. Sheriff Davis looked the other way when the Hadleys rode in. He wouldn't even let me bury my father properly. I'm sorry, Asher said, and Pearl was beginning to understand that when he said those words, he truly meant them. It wasn't your doing, she replied, staring into her coffee. But I can't just leave. Not with my father in an unmarked grave and the men who killed him still walking free. Asher studied her for a long moment. Revenge won't bring him back, Pearl. I know that, she said sharply, then softened her tone. I'm not talking about revenge. I'm talking about justice. And closure. I need to say goodbye properly. Asher nodded slowly. That I understand. He stood and moved to where Copper grazed nearby. We should break camp soon if we want to reach town by nightfall. Pearl blinked in surprise. We're going back to Willow Creek. To bury your father, Asher said simply. Then we'll decide what comes next. Pearl felt a rush of gratitude so intense it nearly took her breath away. The Hadleys won't like that. A dangerous glint appeared in Asher's blue eyes. They're welcome to object. Something told Pearl that the Hadley brothers would regret it if they did. They packed up camp efficiently, Pearl helping where she could. Asher insisted she ride Copper while he walked alongside, despite her protests. I've covered more ground on foot than most men have on horseback, he told her. Save your strength for what's ahead. As they traveled, Pearl asked Asher about his life before their paths crossed. He spoke sparingly but honestly of growing up in Missouri with his freed father and Irish mother, of fighting for the Union despite the South being the only home he'd known, and of drifting westward after the war claimed both his parents to disease. What about you? He asked eventually. How did you and your father end up in Willow Creek? Pearl sighed, memories washing over her. We came for the same reason as everyone else, the Silver Strike. Not to mine it ourselves, but to supply those who did. My father was a merchant back in Pennsylvania before my mother died. When we lost her, He said he couldn't bear to stay where her memory was in every corner. So you came west. Pearl nodded. I was 12. We traveled with a wagon train as far as Denver, then made our own way to Willow Creek when we heard about the strike. It was just starting then, a few tents and ramshackle buildings. We grew with the town. You must have seen a lot of changes. Mostly for the worse, Pearl said grimly. In the beginning, there was a sense of community. People looked out for each other. Then the big mining companies moved in, bringing men like the Hadleys to enforce their will. They fell silent as the outskirts of Willow Creek came into view. Pearl felt her heart rate quicken, memories of her last moments in town flooding back. Asher must have sensed her distress. We don't have to do this today, he said. We can make camp and I can go in alone tomorrow. Pearl straightened her spine. No, I need to do this. For my father. Asher nodded, respecting her decision. As they approached the town, Pearl was acutely aware of the stares that followed them. Word of their return would reach the Hadleys soon enough. Asher seemed unconcerned, his posture relaxed but alert as they made their way to the burned-out shell of the general store. The acrid smell of charred wood still hung in the air. Pearl dismounted, her legs shaky as she surveyed the destruction. Nothing remained but blackened timbers and melted glass. He's buried out back, she said quietly. They wouldn't let me dig a proper grave. Just threw dirt over him where he fell. Anger flashed across Asher's face before he carefully composed his features. Show me. Pearl led him around the ruined building to where a small mound of earth marked her father's hasty burial. She knelt beside it, tears burning her eyes. Hello, Pa, she whispered. I came back like I promised. Asher stood respectfully at a distance, giving her a moment alone with her grief. When she finally looked up, he said, We'll need shovels and a proper coffin. The undertaker might help us, Pearl suggested. Gus Fellows. He was kind to me before everything happened. Asher nodded. Stay here with Copper. I'll be back soon. Asher, Pearl called as he turned to go. Be careful. The Hadleys have eyes everywhere. I will, he promised. Alone with her father's grave, Pearl cleared away debris and placed wildflowers she'd gathered on their journey onto the mound. She spoke softly to him, telling him about Asher and her narrow escape from a fate worse than death. I think you would have liked him, Pa, she said, a sad smile tugging at her lips. He's a good man. The kind you always said were rare as gold nuggets in these parts. She was still talking when she heard footsteps approaching, too many to be just Asher returning. Pearl rose quickly, hand going to the small knife Asher had given her for protection. Earl Hadley emerged from around the corner of the burned building, his brother and two other men flanking him. Well, look who decided to come back, Earl said, his tone falsely pleasant. If it isn't the Taylor girl. Pearl backed away, her grip tightening on the knife. Leave me alone, Hadley. I'm just here to bury my father properly. Now that's touching, Earl mocked, stepping closer. But you see, we had a deal with your cowboy friend. He paid for you fair and square, then let you go. That ain't how property transactions work around here. I'm not property, Pearl said through gritted teeth. That's where you're wrong, girl. The younger Hadley chimed in. Everything in this town belongs to someone, and unclaimed property reverts to the finder. They moved to surround her, and Pearl knew she couldn't fight all four of them. She measured the distance to Copper, wondering if she could reach the horse and flee. I wouldn't, Earl warned, seeing her glance. That'd just make things worse for you in the end. Step away from her, came Asher's voice, cold as winter steel. The men turned to find him standing there, a shotgun held casually but purposefully in his hands. Behind him stood an older man Pearl recognized as Gus Fellows, the undertaker, and Sheriff Davis, looking distinctly uncomfortable. This doesn't concern you anymore, Cole, Earl said, though his confidence had visibly faltered. You gave up your claim. I never had a claim, Asher replied evenly. Miss Taylor is a free woman, and we're here to bury her father with the dignity he deserves. He nodded toward the sheriff. With the law's blessing. Sheriff Davis cleared his throat nervously. That's right, Hadley. The girl's got a right to bury her kin. And Fellows here says the store property is still legally in the Taylor name. Earl's face darkened with fury. Since when do you care about the law, Davis? Since Mr. Cole here reminded me of my duty, the sheriff replied, not meeting Earl's eyes, and of certain telegrams that could be sent to the territorial governor about the goings-on in Willow Creek. Pearl realized with a jolt that Asher had somehow managed to pressure the corrupt sheriff into doing the right thing. The look of impotent rage on Earl Hadley's face confirmed it. "This isn't over," Earl spat, gesturing for his men to withdraw. "Not by a long shot. For today, it is," Asher said calmly, the shotgun never wavering. "Miss Taylor will bury her father, and you'll stay clear of both of them. Or we'll have a different kind of discussion." The threat hung in the air, unambiguous. After a tense moment, the Hadleys retreated, casting venomous glances over their shoulders. Once they were gone, Pearl let out a shaky breath. "How did you manage that?" she asked, nodding toward the sheriff. "Let's just say Sheriff Davis has secrets he'd prefer stayed buried," Asher replied. "Mr. Fellows here was kind enough to fill me in on some local history." The undertaker, a gaunt man with kind eyes, stepped forward. "Miss Taylor, I brought a proper coffin for your father, and I took the liberty of asking Reverend Moore to come perform a service, if you'd like." Tears sprang to Pearl's eyes at this unexpected kindness. "Thank you, Mr. Fellows. That would mean a great deal to me." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Asher and Gus Fellows carefully exhumed Jacob Taylor's body and placed it in the simple but dignified pine coffin. The local reverend arrived and spoke words of comfort as they moved the coffin to the small cemetery on the hill overlooking Willow Creek. Throughout it all, Asher remained a steady presence at Pearl's side, his quiet strength giving her the courage to face the task of saying goodbye to her father. More townspeople arrived as the burial proceeded. Those who had been afraid to show support before now came forward with condolences and small offerings of food or flowers. As the last prayers were spoken and the first shovelfuls of earth fell onto the coffin, Pearl felt a strange mixture of grief and release. Her father was at peace now, properly honored and laid to rest. "Thank you," she said to Asher as they stood alone by the fresh grave after the others had departed. "I couldn't have done this without you." "You're stronger than you know," he replied simply. "But I'm glad I could help." Pearl looked out over the town that had been her home for nearly half her life. "I can't stay here," she said quietly. "Not now." "I know," Asher agreed. "We should leave before sundown. The Hadleys won't stay quiet for long." "We?" Pearl questioned, turning to face him. Asher met her gaze steadily. "Unless you'd rather go alone." In that moment, Pearl realized she didn't want to face the uncertain future by herself. This man, who'd been a stranger 2 days ago, had become her ally, her protector, and perhaps something more. "No," she said softly. "I wouldn't rather go alone." Something shifted in Asher's expression, a softening around his eyes, a hint of relief. "Then we'll go together. California's still waiting." Pearl took one last look at her father's grave. "Goodbye, Pa," she whispered. "I'll make you proud." As they walked back down the hill toward town, Pearl felt a new resolve building within her. Her life in Willow Creek was over, but perhaps something new waited on the horizon, something she couldn't yet name, but somehow felt certain would be worth the journey. They left Willow Creek as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Pearl riding behind Asher on Copper. Mr. Fellows had provided them with supplies, food, a bedroll for Pearl, and a few personal items he'd managed to salvage from the store before the fire consumed everything. "The Hadleys will come after us," Pearl said as the town faded into the distance behind them. "Probably," Asher agreed. "But we've got a head start, and they won't expect us to take this route." Instead of heading west on the main trail toward Silverton, Asher had chosen a lesser-known path that wound northward through the mountains. It would be slower going, but far less likely to be watched. "How do you know these trails?" Pearl asked, impressed by his confidence in navigating the rugged terrain. "Spent time as a scout during the war," Asher explained. "Learned to read land and find paths others miss. It's kept me alive more than once." They rode until full dark made travel dangerous, then made camp in a protected hollow near a small stream. As they sat by the fire eating a simple meal of beans and jerky, Pearl found herself studying Asher's profile, struck by how quickly he had come to matter to her. "Tell me about California," she said. "What will you do when you get there?" Asher poked at the fire thoughtfully. "There's land available for homesteading in the northern valleys. Good soil, they say. I thought I might try farming, grow something instead of destroying things for a change." "You want to be a farmer?" Pearl asked, surprised. A small smile crossed his face. "Hard to believe?" My father was a farmer before he was taken. He taught me to respect the land. Said a man who can grow his own food is the only truly free man. No, it's not hard to believe, Pearl said softly. I think it suits you. What about you? Asher asked. What would you do in California? Pearl considered the question. I've never thought much beyond helping my father with the store. But I've always loved making things clothes, quilts. Maybe I could do something with that. You'd be good at it, Asher said with such certainty that Pearl felt a warm glow of pleasure. How would you know? She challenged teasingly. He gestured to her dress, which she'd mended cleverly with thread from Fellows' supplies. Anyone who can turn a disaster into something presentable that quickly has a gift. Pearl laughed her first genuine laugh since before her father's death. That's hardly evidence of great talent. I disagree, Asher said, his eyes warm in the firelight. Creating beauty from hardship takes a special kind of strength. The words hung between them, suddenly charged with meaning beyond the simple compliment. Pearl felt a blush rise to her cheeks and looked away. We should get some rest, Asher said after a moment. We've got a long day ahead tomorrow. They settled into their respective bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire, but sleep eluded Pearl. Her mind kept returning to Asher, to his kindness, his courage, the way his rare smiles transformed his serious face. Asher, she called softly into the darkness. Are you awake? Yes, came his reply. Why did you really do it? Save me, I mean. The truth. There was a long silence, and Pearl thought he might not answer. When I saw you standing there, he finally said, his voice low. Something inside me couldn't bear the thought of what they were doing to you. It wasn't just about my father's past or doing what's right. It was about you, your dignity, your courage. I couldn't look away. Pearl's heart quickened at his words. Thank you for not looking away, she whispered. Get some sleep, Pearl, he said gently. Tomorrow's another day. This time, when Pearl closed her eyes, sleep came more easily, her dreams filled with open skies and new beginnings. They traveled for 5 days through the mountains, taking a circuitous route to avoid pursuit. Asher proved to be a skilled guide, finding game trails and hidden passes that kept them moving steadily westward while avoiding the main routes where the Hadleys might look for them. During those days on the trail, Pearl learned more about Asher than he had likely revealed to anyone in years. He told her about his childhood in Missouri, about his mother's wild Irish stories, and his father's quiet wisdom. He spoke of the war not of battles or glory, but of the men he'd known and lost, and how it had changed him. In turn, Pearl shared her own stories of life in Pennsylvania before her mother died, of the journey west with her father, and of building a life in the rough and tumble mining town that had eventually betrayed them both. With each passing day, the easy companionship between them deepened into something more. Pearl found herself noticing small details about Asher, the way the corner of his mouth quirked up when he was amused, but trying not to show it, how gentle his hands could be when tending to copper or helping her across a difficult stretch of trail. On the evening of the 5th day, they made camp near a high mountain meadow filled with wildflowers. The air was cool but not cold, the sky a canvas of stars above them. We should reach Durango by tomorrow afternoon, Asher said as they finished their evening meal. It's a proper town with a railroad. We can take the train west from there. Pearl nodded, though a strange anxiety had begun to gnaw at her. Once they reached civilization, would things change between them? Would Asher feel his obligation fulfilled and go his separate way? Penny for your thoughts, Asher said, noticing her distraction. Pearl picked at a loose thread on her sleeve. I was just wondering what happens when we reach Durango. We buy train tickets, Asher said, then paused, studying her face. Unless you've changed your mind about California? No, it's not that, Pearl said hastily. She took a deep breath. I just don't know where I stand with you. If you feel responsible for me, or if, Pearl, Asher interrupted gently. I haven't stayed with you out of obligation. Her eyes met his across the fire. Then why have you stayed? Asher was silent for a long moment, his gaze steady. Because in all my years of wandering, I've never met anyone like you. Because when I think about that farm in California, I can't picture it without you there. Pearl's breath caught in her throat. Asher, he moved around the fire to sit beside her, close but not touching. I know it's fast, he said, his voice low. We've only known each other days. But sometimes life doesn't give you years to recognize what matters. No, Pearl agreed, her heart racing. Sometimes it only takes moments. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Asher reached up to brush a strand of hair from her face. His fingers lingered against her cheek. I don't want to presume, he said. You've been through so much. Pearl covered his hand with her own, holding it against her cheek. You're the one good thing to come from all of this, she said softly. I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want to face it with you. Asher's eyes darkened with emotion. Leaning forward, he pressed his lips to hers in a kiss so tender it brought tears to Pearl's eyes. It was a promise, an offering, a beginning all wrapped into one sweet moment. When they parted, Asher rested his forehead against hers. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. Pearl smiled, a sense of rightness settling over her. Despite all the loss and pain of the past days, here in this moment, she had found something precious, something worth fighting for. Morning brought a clear sky and renewed purpose. They packed camp efficiently, both acutely aware of the shift in their relationship, but comfortable in the new dynamic. Asher's hand lingered when he helped Pearl onto Copper, and she didn't hesitate to wrap her arms around his waist as they rode. They had just crested a ridge overlooking a valley when Asher suddenly pulled Copper to a halt, his body tensing. What is it? Pearl whispered, sensing his alarm. Riders, Asher said grimly, pointing to a dust cloud in the distance. 5, maybe 6 of them, moving fast. Pearl felt a chill of fear. The Hadleys. Likely, Asher agreed, quickly surveying their options. They must have figured out which way we went. How? You said no one would expect us to take this route. Someone in town must have talked, Asher muttered. Or they got lucky. He urged Copper off the trail and into the cover of the trees, considering their limited options. The forest to their right offered concealment, but difficult terrain. The valley ahead provided faster travel, but left them exposed. Behind them lay the path they'd already traveled, where they'd surely be overtaken. We can't outrun them, Asher said, making a quick decision. Not with Copper carrying double. We need to find a defensive position. Pearl scanned the landscape, remembering something her father had taught her years ago. There, she said, pointing to a rocky outcropping about half a mile ahead. Pa called formations like that nature's forts. We'd have high ground and cover. Asher nodded approvingly. Good eye. Let's go. They urged Copper forward at the fastest pace possible through the rugged terrain, making for the outcropping Pearl had spotted. Behind them, the dust cloud grew closer. They've seen us, Pearl said, glancing back. We'll make it, Asher assured her, though his expression was grim. They reached the rock formation with minutes to spare. Asher helped Pearl dismount quickly, then led Copper to a sheltered spot among the rocks. Stay with him, Asher instructed, pulling his rifle from its scabbard. I'm going to see what we're up against. Pearl grabbed his arm. Take this, she said, pulling a small derringer from her boot, another gift from Mr. Fellows. It's only got 2 shots, but it's better than nothing. Asher looked surprised but took the small pistol, tucking it into his belt. Where did you learn to be so resourceful? Survival in mining towns isn't just a man's concern, Pearl replied with a determined smile. Asher squeezed her hand once, then moved to a position where he could observe the approaching riders. Pearl stayed with Copper, calming the horse while preparing herself for whatever came next. Minutes later, Asher returned, his expression confirming what they'd feared. It's the Hadleys, all right. Earl and his brother, plus 4 hired guns. What do we do? Pearl asked, her voice steady despite her fear. They've spotted our position, Asher said. But they'll be careful approaching. These rocks give us an advantage. He quickly organized their limited resources, positioning Pearl where she'd have cover while still being able to reload for him if necessary. The tension grew as the riders approached, finally stopping about 100 yards from the base of the outcropping. Cole, Earl Hadley's voice carried up to their position. We know you're up there. Send the girl down, and you can ride away from this. Not going to happen, Hadley. Asher called back. Turn around and go home. A harsh laugh floated up. You're outnumbered and outgunned. Don't be stupid. I'm not the one riding into rifle range for a fight I don't need to have. Asher replied calmly, his rifle ready. This doesn't have to end badly. Oh, but it does, Earl shouted. You embarrassed me in my own town. Took what was mine. Nobody does that to Earl Hadley. Pearl touched Asher's arm. He won't back down, she whispered. Not while he has those men with him. Asher nodded grimly. Stay down, he instructed. This is about to get ugly. The first shot came from below, a warning fired into the rocks near their position. Asher didn't flinch, watching patiently as the Hadleys and their men spread out, seeking angles of approach. When one rider tried to circle around the left flank of the outcropping, Asher fired a single, precise shot. The man tumbled from his saddle with a cry of pain. That's one, Asher called down. He'll live, but he won't be riding for a while. Next one won't be so lucky. His warning had an immediate effect. The remaining attackers pulled back, conferring among themselves before splitting up further to approach from multiple directions. For the next hour, a tense standoff ensued. Occasional shots were exchanged, but Asher was careful with his ammunition, firing only when he had a clear target. His military experience showed in his patience and precision. Pearl stayed close, helping when she could, her fear gradually giving way to a steady resolve. They would survive this, they had to. As the sun began its westward descent, Pearl noticed a change in the pattern of gunfire from below. They're trying to draw your attention to the right, she whispered, pointing to movement she'd spotted on their left flank. Asher nodded appreciatively. Good catch, he murmured, adjusting his position to counter the new threat. When a shadow appeared among the rocks to their left, Asher was ready. His shot caught the climber in the shoulder, sending him tumbling back down with a string of curses. Two down, Asher called. How many more men are you willing to sacrifice, Hadley? The response was a volley of gunfire that forced them to duck behind the rocks. When it subsided, Earl's voice rang out again. This ends today, Cole. One way or another. Pearl clutched Asher's arm. They're not giving up. Neither are we, Asher replied, his jaw set with determination. As the standoff continued, Pearl became aware of a new sound beneath the occasional gunfire hoofbeats, and plenty of them, approaching from the direction of Durango. Asher heard it too, his expression cautiously hopeful. Riders coming, he said quietly. A lot of them. More of Hadley's men. Pearl asked worriedly. Don't think so, Asher replied, peering carefully over the rocks. Looks like. A genuine smile spread across his face. It's the Durango marshal and his deputies. Relief flooded through Pearl as she saw the dust cloud of approaching lawmen. The Hadleys had evidently spotted them too, because their gunfire suddenly ceased. Hadley, came a new voice, authoritative and clear. This is Marshal James Donovan. Throw down your weapons. What followed was a blur of activity as the Hadleys and their remaining men, now outmanned and outgunned, reluctantly surrendered. Marshal Donovan and his deputies 8 strong had them disarmed and under guard within minutes. When Asher and Pearl finally emerged from their rocky sanctuary, the marshal approached them, tipping his hat respectfully to Pearl. Mr. Cole, Miss Taylor, he said, surprising them both by knowing their names. Glad we got here in time. How did you know who we are? Asher asked cautiously. Got a telegram from Gus Fellows in Willow Creek, the marshal explained. Said you might be headed this way with trouble on your tail. Told us the whole story about your father, Miss Taylor, and what the Hadleys did. Pearl exchanged a glance with Asher. It seemed Mr. Fellows had been looking out for them even after they left. What happens now? She asked. The Hadleys will face justice, Marshal Donovan said firmly. Murder, attempted murder, illegal slave trading. The territorial governor's been looking for an excuse to clean up Willow Creek for months. This might finally do it. Earl Hadley, sitting sullenly on the ground with his hands bound, spat in their direction. This isn't over, he growled. Marshal Donovan cuffed him roughly on the back of the head. It's over for you, Hadley. You'll be lucky to avoid the hangman's noose. As the deputies prepared to take their prisoners back to Durango, the marshal turned back to Asher and Pearl. You two are welcome to ride with us. Town's not far, and I expect you could use a proper meal and a safe place to rest. Pearl looked at Asher, who nodded gratefully. That would be most appreciated, Marshal. As they rode toward Durango with the lawmen, Pearl felt the weight of the past days beginning to lift. The Hadleys would face justice. She and Asher had survived, and ahead lay possibilities she couldn't have imagined a week ago. Asher rode close beside her, their shoulders occasionally brushing. The connection between them had only strengthened through their ordeal. What are you thinking? He asked quietly, noting her thoughtful expression. Pearl smiled. looking ahead to where the town of Durango was just becoming visible in the distance. I'm thinking that endings and beginnings sometimes happen in the same moment. Asher reached across to take her hand, squeezing it gently. And which is this? An ending or a beginning? Pearl interlaced her fingers with his. Definitely a beginning. The smile that spread across Asher's face was like sunrise after the longest night, full of promise, hope, and unspoken love. Durango welcomed them with a sense of normalcy that felt almost surreal after their ordeal. The marshal arranged rooms for them at the hotel separate but adjoining, a nod to propriety that made Pearl smile despite herself. After hot baths and clean clothes, purchased with money the marshal had advanced them from a fund for victims of crime, they met for dinner in the hotel restaurant. Asher looked different in fresh clothing, his hair still damp from washing, his face clean-shaven. Yet the essence of him remained unchanged, the quiet strength, the watchful eyes that softened whenever they met hers. "You clean up nicely, Mr. Cole," Pearl teased as they were seated at a table near the window. "As do you, Miss Taylor," he replied, his gaze appreciative as it took in her new dress, a simple blue cotton that nonetheless fit better than the worn garment she'd been traveling in. They ordered a proper meal there first since leaving Willow Creek, and as they ate, they began to plan their future in earnest. "The train to Denver leaves tomorrow," Asher said. "From there, we can connect to the transcontinental line west." Pearl nodded, excitement building within her despite the lingering sadness of recent events. "How long until we reach California?" "About a week, if the trains run on schedule," Asher replied. "I've saved enough for our tickets and some land when we arrive." Pearl hesitated, then reached into her pocket, withdrawing a small leather pouch. "I have something that might help," she said, placing it on the table between them. Asher looked at it questioningly. "It's my mother's wedding ring," Pearl explained, "and 3 gold coins my father kept hidden in the store for emergencies. Mr. Fellows found them in the ashes and gave them to me before we left." Asher's expression softened. "Pearl, that's your inheritance. I wouldn't ask you to." "You're not asking," she interrupted gently. "I'm offering. If we're to build a life together, we should start on equal footing." Asher studied her face, then slowly covered her hand with his own. "Together, then. But the ring stays with you where it belongs." Pearl felt warmth spread through her chest at his words and the implication behind them. After dinner, they walked through the town, enjoying the simple pleasure of safety and each other's company. Durango was a growing settlement with proper wooden sidewalks, several saloons, and even a small theater advertising a traveling show. "It feels strange," Pearl admitted as they paused to look in a shop window displaying household goods. "A week ago, my world was burning down around me. Now I'm planning a new life thousands of miles away. Do you have regrets?" Asher asked, watching her carefully. Pearl shook her head. "Not about leaving. Only about those I've lost along the way." She looked up at him. "But I found something too." Asher's hand found hers as they continued their walk. "Pearl," he said after a moment, "there's something I need to ask you." They had reached a small park near the center of town where a gazebo stood illuminated by lanterns. Asher led her to a bench beneath a flowering tree, the scent of blossoms sweet in the evening air. "What is it?" Pearl asked, noting the serious expression on his face. Asher took both her hands in his thumbs tracing gentle circles on her skin. "When we reach California, I want to build that farm I told you about. I want to make something good and lasting." "I want that too," Pearl said softly. "What I'm trying to say is," Asher paused, seeming uncharacteristically nervous. "When I picture that farm, that life, I see you as my wife, not just my traveling companion." Pearl's heart skipped a beat. "Asher, I know it's soon," he continued quickly. "Too soon, maybe. We've known each other barely a week. But I've lived enough to recognize what matters when I find it. And you, Pearl Taylor, matter more than anything has in a very long time." Tears welled in Pearl's eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sadness. "Some people search their whole lives for what we found in a week," she said. "Is that a yes?" Asher asked, hope evident in his voice. Pearl squeezed his hands. "Yes, Asher Cole. When we reach California, I will gladly be your wife." The smile that transformed Asher's face was like nothing Pearl had seen before, unguarded, radiating happiness. He pulled her gently into his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that held the promise of a lifetime. When they parted, Pearl reached into her pocket and withdrew the small leather pouch again. Opening it, she tipped her mother's wedding ring into her palm, a simple gold band worn smooth with years of love. "My mother would want you to have this," she said, holding it out to Asher, "to give to me when the time comes." Asher took the ring reverently, understanding the significance of her gesture. "I'll keep it safe until we reach California," he promised. As they walked back to the hotel, plans and dreams flowing between them, Pearl felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced since before her father's death. The future stretching before them wouldn't be without challenges, but they would face them together. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Pearl woke early, excitement making sleep impossible as she prepared for their departure. The train to Denver would leave at noon, beginning their journey west in earnest. A knock at her door revealed Asher, already dressed and ready, a small package in his hand. "Good morning," he greeted her with a smile. "I brought you something." Pearl invited him in and unwrapped the package to find a journal bound in soft leather, with a pencil tucked into its spine. "I thought you might want to record our journey," Asher explained, "and maybe sketch some designs for those dresses you'll make someday." The thoughtfulness of the gift touched Pearl deeply. "It's perfect," she said, running her fingers over the smooth cover. "Thank you." They had breakfast at the hotel, then made their way to the marshal's office to bid farewell to Marshal Donovan. He greeted them warmly, offering news that the Hadleys were securely locked up awaiting transfer to the territorial prison. "The governor's sending investigators to Willow Creek," the marshal told them. "Sounds like there'll be quite a cleanup. You two started something important." "We just wanted to be free," Pearl said simply. The marshal nodded understanding. "Best of luck to you both in California. If you ever pass through Durango again, you'll always have friends here." Their final stop before the train station was the telegraph office, where Pearl sent a message to Gus Fellows, thanking him for his help and letting him know they were safe and heading west. It felt important to maintain that connection to her past, even as she embraced her future. As they boarded the train, Pearl took one last look at the mountains that had been her home for so many years. There was sadness in leaving, but it was tempered by the knowledge that she carried the best parts of her past with her memories, her skills, her father's teachings. Asher settled beside her as the train lurched into motion, his presence solid and reassuring. "Are you ready?" he asked, taking her hand in his. Pearl smiled, turning from the window to face him. "More than ready." The journey to California unfolded like chapters in the new journal Asher had given her. Pearl filled pages with descriptions of the changing landscape, sketches of design ideas that came to her, and reflections on the remarkable turn her life had taken. Denver gave way to the vast plains, then to mountain passes and desert stretches as they traveled west on the Transcontinental Railroad. At night, they shared a small sleeping compartment, Pearl taking the lower berth, Asher the upper, both respecting the boundaries of their yet-to-be-formalized relationship despite the deepening love between them. During the days, they planned their future in detail. Asher had researched available land in the Sacramento Valley, where rich soil promised good farming if one was willing to work hard. Pearl sketched ideas for the house they would build, incorporating elements she remembered from her childhood home in Pennsylvania. "It won't be grand at first," Asher cautioned as they reviewed her drawings. "It doesn't need to be grand," Pearl replied. "Just ours." On the 7th day of their journey, the train pulled into Sacramento Station. The California sunshine greeted them with golden warmth as they stepped onto the platform, their few possessions packed in 2 small bags. "So this is California," Pearl said, taking in the bustling activity around them. The city was larger than any she'd seen since leaving the East, a mix of established buildings and new construction that spoke of rapid growth. "Just the beginning," Asher replied, his arm protective around her shoulders. "The land I want to see is north of here, in the valley." They spent a night in Sacramento, acquiring necessary supplies and information. The next morning, they purchased a wagon and team, a significant investment, but essential for establishing their homestead. With directions from the land office, they set out north toward the unclaimed parcels still available for settlement. 3 days later, they crested a small rise and Asher drew the wagon to a halt. Before them stretched a valley of such beauty, it took Pearl's breath away. Rolling grasslands gave way to scattered oak trees, with mountains rising in the distance and a clear stream cutting through the heart of the landscape. What do you think? Asher asked, his eyes on Pearl's face rather than the view. Pearl took in the sweeping vista, imagining the farm they could build here, the life they could create. It's perfect, she said simply. Asher nodded, satisfied. There's a parcel near the stream that the land agent mentioned. 160 acres. Ours for the claiming under the Homestead Act if we improve it and live on it for 5 years. Then let's claim it, Pearl said with determination. Today. They made their way down to the valley floor, following the stream until they found the boundary markers the land agent had described. When they reached the center of what would be their property, Asher helped Pearl down from the wagon. Standing together on the land that would be their home, Asher reached into his pocket and withdrew the small gold ring Pearl had given him in Durango. I think it's time, he said quietly. Pearl's heart quickened as Asher took her hand in his. Pearl Taylor, he said, his voice steady and sure. I promised you a new beginning when we reached California. Here we are, on land that will be our home and our future. Will you marry me, build this life with me, face whatever comes with me at your side? Tears of joy sprang to Pearl's eyes as she replied, Yes, Asher Cole. Today and all our tomorrows. Asher slipped the ring onto her finger, her mother's ring, a connection to her past now becoming part of her future. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting all along for this moment. Their kiss, witnessed only by the vast California sky and the land that would be their home, sealed a promise born in the darkest of circumstances but destined to flourish in the light of their shared future. 2 weeks later, they stood before a justice of the peace in the small settlement that would be their nearest town. Pearl wore a new dress. She had made herself simple but beautiful, with tiny wildflowers embroidered along the collar in remembrance of those she had placed on her father's grave. Asher, clean-shaven and solemn in his best shirt, spoke his vows with the same quiet conviction with which he approached everything in life. When he promised to honor and protect Pearl all the days of his life, she knew without doubt that he meant every word. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the justice declared, and just like that, their journey from strangers to life partners was complete. Their first home on the new land was modest, a one-room cabin that they built together with lumber purchased from the sawmill in town. It would serve until they could construct the larger house Pearl had designed, but even in its simplicity, it was a haven of peace and love. Pearl planted a garden, while Asher began the harder work of clearing fields for crops. Each evening, they would sit on the small porch he had insisted on building, watching the sunset paint the valley in hues of gold and crimson. Are you happy? Asher asked one such evening, his arm around Pearl as they shared the simple pleasure of twilight. Pearl leaned into his embrace, considering the question. 6 months had passed since that terrible day in Willow Creek. She still thought of her father daily, still missed him with an ache that would likely never fully disappear. But alongside the grief, she had found joy, purpose, and love deeper than she had ever imagined possible. Yes, she answered honestly. Happier than I thought I could be after everything that happened. Asher pressed a kiss to her temple. Your father would be proud of you. He would have liked you, Pearl said, a smile touching her lips. He always said I should marry a man who worked with his hands and his heart. You do both. As night fell and stars appeared above their little cabin, Pearl thought about the strange twists of fate that had brought her to this moment. How the worst day of her life had led, ultimately, to finding her true home. How a man who happened to be passing through a mining town had changed her life forever with 6 simple words. I'll stay so she never has to. 5 years passed, seasons flowing one into the next as Asher and Pearl Cole built their farm and their life together. The one-room cabin gave way to the house of Pearl's designs, a comfortable 2-story home with wide porches and plenty of room for the family they hoped to create. Their hard work paid off as the farm prospered. Asher's careful stewardship of the land resulted in bountiful harvests, while Pearl's garden supplied their table and began to produce surplus they could sell in town. She had also begun a small dressmaking business, her skillful creations earning a reputation that brought customers from as far as Sacramento. In their 3rd year on the farm, their first child was born, a daughter they named Hope, for all she represented in their lives. She had Asher's blue eyes and Pearl's determined spirit, a perfect blend of them both. As Pearl sat nursing their second child, a son they had named Jacob after her father, she gazed out the window at Asher working in the fields, Hope toddling after him on sturdy little legs. The sight filled her heart with such love and gratitude, it was almost overwhelming. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Pearl and Asher sat on their porch swing, a nightly ritual they maintained no matter how busy life became. "I received a letter today," Pearl said, leaning against Asher's shoulder. "From Mr. Fellows in Willow Creek." Oh, Asher's interest was evident. Though they had built a new life in California, they had maintained correspondence with the few friends from their past. "He says the town has changed completely since the territorial governor's investigation. The mining company that backed the Hadleys was forced out, and honest businesses are thriving. He's expanded the funeral parlor to include a furniture shop." "Good for him," Asher said warmly. "He's a decent man. Deserves success." Pearl hesitated, then continued. "He also mentioned that Earl Hadley died in prison last month. Consumption, apparently." Asher was quiet for a moment, processing this news. "Can't say I'm sorry to hear it," he finally said. "But I don't celebrate any man's death." "Nor do I," Pearl agreed. "It just feels like the final chapter of our old life has closed." Asher's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Our story's just beginning, Pearl. The best parts are still ahead." As if to confirm his words, a soft cry came from inside the house, little Jacob awakening for his nighttime feeding. Pearl rose, pressing a kiss to Asher's lips before going to tend their son. Standing in the nursery a few minutes later, Pearl gazed down at Jacob's tiny face as he nursed contentedly. Across the hall, Hope slept peacefully in her small bed, surrounded by the quilt Pearl had lovingly stitched during her pregnancy. Through the window, Pearl could see Asher walking the boundary of their property, a nightly ritual of protection and gratitude. Their land, their home, their life, all created from the ashes of loss and the foundation of love. She thought of that moment on the auction block in Willow Creek, when a stranger passing through had looked at her with compassion rather than greed. How could she have known then that his act of kindness would lead to this: a family, a home, a love that grew stronger with each passing day? Fate worked in mysterious ways, Pearl reflected. Sometimes the darkest moments led to the brightest futures. Sometimes the end of one journey was merely the beginning of another, more beautiful one. As Asher returned to the house and appeared in the nursery doorway, his face soft with love as he gazed at his wife and son, Pearl knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. "I love you," she said simply. "And I love you," Asher replied, crossing the room to embrace his family. "Today and all our tomorrows." In that moment, surrounded by the life they had built together, Pearl understood that true wealth had nothing to do with gold mines or general stores. It was measured in moments like these, in love freely given and joyfully received, in family bonds that could never be broken, in a home created not just of wood and nails, but of dreams and devotion. They had come so far from that dusty street in Willow Creek. The auction block and the Hadley brothers were distant memories now, overshadowed by 5 years of building something beautiful and lasting. Their homestead was officially theirs now, the requirements of the Homestead Act fulfilled through their labor and persistence. As little Jacob drifted back to sleep, Pearl placed him gently in his cradle. Together, she and Asher walked hand in hand to their porch, where they stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge above their land. "Thank you," Pearl said softly. "For what?" Asher asked, curious. "For staying. For saying you would stay so I would never have to be sold." Asher turned to her, cupping her face gently in his calloused hands. "Best decision I ever made," he said, his voice rich with emotion. "And one I would make again every day of my life." Their kiss, sweet and familiar, yet still filled with the passion that had drawn them together, was a promise renewed, a testament to love found in the most unexpected circumstances and nurtured into something enduring and true. Above them, stars scattered across the California sky like diamonds on velvet, bearing witness to the quiet miracle of their lives, two souls who had found each other against all odds and built a future brighter than either could have imagined alone.